Kate, you ready, Mary Kate? Go ahead, Mary Kate.
All right. I need a more like authoritative, like hands on me. Bob
You
has
listen to me when growing up, you know.
I know. Bob always has like a clapping thing. We'll figure it out. But I was saying, thanks everybody for coming tonight. If it's your first time coming here, my name's Mary Kate. I'm the president of the Brightwaters Historical Society. I always love seeing our seats full of people, so thank you for coming. If it's your first meeting, a millionth meeting, we always appreciate it. Just a couple quick housekeeping while I have your attention and sitting here. Just wanted to kind of walk everybody through. I know we've been talking about the 250th committee that's going to be celebrating American's birthday next year here in Brightwaters. We're having our next, not so much meeting, but volunteer opportunity. We're taking on Light the Night for this year in Brightwaters to kind of help us for our activities that we have planned next year. We're going to be meeting at the Highway Yard this Saturday, starting at 9 a.m. We put together about half the kits, so we have about an hour and a half, 2 hours worth of work, and then we'll be all done, and the kits will be available for sale November 15th. It's going to be at local businesses in Village Hall, but we're really excited to bring back that tradition. It's been going on, but it was downtown last year, and we just really want to pump it up in the village this year and start up the year with a bang. So
Just
that's going to be...
Mary Kate, to remind the Bay Shore Beautification is not doing it.
Yeah, they're not doing it at all.
Yes, we're not competing with them,
No.
but we're taking it over in the village.
Yes, we're more continuing the tradition for them. So that's going to be this Saturday. If you'd like to volunteer, that's going on. December 3rd, just want to mention that meeting. It's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be here at the cabin, but instead of our normal speaker, we're going to be having a market for the holidays. It's going to be a one-stop shop for all of your holiday needs. We have a lot of great local vendors. Woodworking, kids' toys, crafts. We also have vintage clothing, bakers. We're going to have holiday wreaths that she's making live for your home or for a gift. All people from the village or right outside of the village. So we're really excited to do that. The Brightwaters Choir will be singing that night. So it's going to be a great Brightwaters showcase of residents, but we are just really happy to offer shopping local as an option. I always know I need last minute gifts, and it's cool to have something that someone doesn't already have. So that's going to be December 3rd. And then talking about next year, our 2026 membership drive is open. So if you want to be the first one to sign up for our membership, our forms are over there. Hopefully you signed in. If not, you can go back and grab a form on the way out. Our members have different access to discounts on our merchandise, our workshops. We also send out special information, recaps for the month. And also your donation of becoming a member helps us with our preservation goals and helping us digitize and keep moving that ball forward. And it also helps pay for our speakers that we bring in every month. So your donation is really appreciated. And yeah, so without further ado, the reason why you guys are here, I'm excited to introduce S.J Peddie, an investigative reporter with Newsday Media Group and also a Pulitzer Prize finalist in a series of stories on police misconduct. She's won more than 75 awards for her work, including 2 New York Emmys for her documentaries. She has been a featured speaker at national conferences and has taught journalism. She's also an author of many books, including one we're going to hear about tonight about Sonny Franzese, right? Franzese. I always say it wrong. Okay, well, we're excited to have you, so thank you.
Crowd, so this is very exciting. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to start off with, do you notice anything about this cover? Does anything jump out at you? The red for the blood. Yes, of course, he was big name. Anything else like down around here? What do you see? You see S.J Peddie. I've never been known as S.J Peddie in my life. I am Sandra Peddie. So why am I S.J Peddie on this book? Well, my publisher didn't think that the people who read mob books would buy a mob book about a mob boss by a woman. And, you know, my TV agent was, we're going to fight it. The literary agent was like, well, I actually believe he was right. Because I've now gotten to know the readers of mob books, and it is an uber alpha male crowd. And my agent, he called me up one day, and he's always calling up people and say, oh, talk to this guy, you know, so people I have no idea who they are. So he puts this known actor and producer on the phone. And the guy says to me, yeah, I hope you didn't get anything wrong. I've never met him in my life. And I said, no, I can footnote every line. And I could hear my agent laughing in the background saying, see, I told you. Now, so that tells me that he didn't think a woman could do this. Now, by the way, he was affecting a Brooklyn accent. I checked this guy out. He grew up in upstate New York and went to Syracuse University, so give me a break. But he may produce a movie about this, so, you know, I can't complain too much. But, so this means I'm S.J. Peddie now going forward, writing about organized crime. So, who was Sonny Franzese? He was a Colombo crime family underboss. He died at age 103 in February of 2020, right before COVID. And he was in a nursing home. And the doctors were telling us it's this strange new flu. So we think he died of COVID. In any case, this is a picture of Sonny at his mother's funeral. You see the handcuffs there. This is while he was in prison. And over on the right is sort of a crib sheet about Sonny as a bad guy. This is from the Bureau of Narcotics, which was a precursor to the FBI, and they were keeping track of all the organized crime guys. As J. Edgar Hoover was saying, oh no, organized crime does not exist. But guess what? It did. Go to the next slide. So, and I should tell you a little bit more about Sonny, why you care about Sonny. Sonny embodied the rise and the fall of the American Mafia. And people always say to me, aren't you glamorizing the Mafia by writing about him? No, he's an important part of American history. And like it or not, the Mafia is an important part of American history. And they're still around, as we know from the big gambling scandal that broke last week. And they're still on Long Island. And by the way, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I grew up in Minnesota. I didn't know anything about organized crime. I moved to Long Island and I'm covering Brookhaven town, and there are mobsters at the town board meetings. I'm like, what is this, you know? And they're hanging out with politicians, and I'm asking a friend of mine, well, what's going on? And he goes, well, they want the same thing, money and power. Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But so here I am, you know, at this point in my career, writing about organized crime, which is crazy. But back to Sonny. Sonny, as I said, was a Colombo crime family underboss, believed to have killed 40 to 50 people. He was bigger than John Gotti. I know Gotti is a better known name, but Sonny was bigger. He was caught on a wiretap saying, ooh, Sonny was tough. He was really tough guy. And Sonny later authorized a hit on John Gotti Jr. because he thought he was a rat. And one of the famous things about Sonny is he never ratted anyone out. He never rolled. And it was funny, a friend of mine called me on a Sunday, and my agent called on the other line to tell me that I had gotten a book deal. So I said, oh, let me take this other call, talk to my son. And I come back and she goes, what's that about? What's your book about? And I said, well, you know, it's about this mobster, and well, what's the big deal about him? Well, he never ratted anyone out. She goes, ratted anyone out? Again, she's from Minnesota. And I said, well, he never rolled. And she's like, oh my God, you're talking like a mob ball. Anyway, so how did I get involved with Sonny Franzese? I don't know if any of you know of Michael Franzese. He is the stepson of Sonny. He has a pretty popular YouTube channel right now. And I was interviewing him for another story about the mob on Long Island in the 90s. And he says to me, yeah, I'm gonna go up to Devens, Massachusetts because my dad's gonna get out of prison. He's the oldest person in the federal prison system. And I'm thinking, oh, that's a story. So, you know, I write Sonny, I contact his family, I spend weeks trying to get some kind of connection with him at the prison. And of course he doesn't answer. So we drive up to Devens, Massachusetts. It's 2 videographers and me. And while we were waiting, we had to get food delivered. And we're across from the prison because they don't let you on the prison grounds. you know. And we're calling the deli and they go, well, where are you? Well, just across from the prison. Well, usually we deliver to an address. You'll see us, don't worry. But anyway, so I am literally checking every car with New York plates to see which one is Sonny. And because I had never met a mob boss before, I thought I should have an offering of sorts. So I brought a platter of cookies, Italian cookies. So I am literally running up to every car with cookies. And we run up to the car, and we think it's Sonny. I say, hi, these cookies are for Sonny. And the driver is looking at me as if I'm out of my mind. And I'm gonna come back to the driver, so if I forget, remind me to tell you about the driver. Oh, no, this isn't Sonny. And you can see he looks kind of skinny. He was 100, you know. And he sort of jumped when I said his name, but it's no, it's not Sonny. He said, really, it's not Sonny? So we believe him, and we walk back to the car. And the other videographer says, you know, because the last picture I had seen of Sonny is, he was kind of a fat guy, you know. And this guy was skinny, but he had been in a medical prison. So the other videographer says, you know, I think that's Sonny. So I send the picture to Michael, and it was Sonny Franzese. So next slide. So I did a story, and I thought, well, we got to do more. So he was moved to a nursing home in Queens. And so then, of course, the effort becomes trying to talk to him. And I interviewed all sorts of family and friends, and finally connected with a guy by the name of Frankie Blue Eyes. And I do not, to this day, know his last name. And he made the connection to Sonny. And this is Sonny. This is me showing Sonny a 1964 Life magazine article about him. He was at that time 101. Charming, smart, funny, great storyteller, at times terrifying, and I'm not kidding, and very proud of the fact that he had all his own hair. So let's go to the next slide. Let's see where, okay. So why was Sonny important? He knew everybody. I mean, he lived over a century, and he was revered on the street. And, you know, I would call guys and I'm like, oh, you're talking to Sonny? Tell Sonny, you know, I hope he's okay. Tell him I send him my best. He knew Albert Anastasia, who was the Mad Hatter, you know, major killer in Murder, Inc. Al Capone carved his initials in the social club counter that Sonny's father ran in Brooklyn. And then Frank Costello was a silent partner in the Copacabana, which was a big hangout of Sonny. So let's go to the next slide. So here's a not very good picture of the Copacabana, but as I said, Frank Costello was a silent partner, and Sonny told me, he said, you know, sometimes I think people were coming there to see me and not the people on stage, which is true. And one day I said to him, because I did 6 interviews with Sonny, and as well as interviews with 130 other people for the book, but I did 6 interviews with Sonny. I was sitting with him one day, and I said, Sonny, did you know Frank Sinatra? And he goes, you asked that question the wrong way. He said, you should have said, did Frank Sinatra know Sonny Franzese? You know? And he started to tell me funny stories about Frank Sinatra. One day, he told me all about making out with Ava Gardner in the back of the Copacabana. And but one day he said, you know, he was walking through the club, and Frank was calling to him, and he ignored him because he had to put Frank in his place, because he considered himself more important than Frank Sinatra, which he was in his world. Next slide. So, Sonny he got married fairly young, had 3 kids, and then he met Tina Capobianco when she was 16. She was a cigarette girl at the Stork Club, and he fell in love at first sight. He was 33 at the time. As I said, married with 3 children, and he commences this relationship with 16-year-old Tina. But Tina she was no pushover. She was incredibly tough-minded. She was smart. She was the only one who dared to go toe-to-toe with Sonny. She was the one person in his life he couldn't tame. So Tina, she used to drive by his apartment with his wife and yell at the wife to leave. I mean, but so she's 16. At 18, she marries another guy, and she has Michael Franzese. Michael, up until the time he was 24, was known as Michael Grillo because he was the son of her first husband. Then eventually they got together. You could go to the next slide, thank you. And she is 23, he's 17 years old or so, 40, whatever it was. But you can't see here, they got quickie divorces and got married in Acapulco. And you can see these disapproving looks in the background of such a young woman with an older man. She had a little surprise, and I'm not going to tell you everything because I want you to read the book, but there are a few details. She found out after she got married that he had 3 kids and she was expected to take care of them. So this is their house in Roslyn. This is a backyard photo. You can't see it terribly well there, but they had an in-ground pool, which was a rare thing in the 1960s. And in the 1960s, the mob was really still at its peak, and everybody on the block knew who he was, and they loved it. They had no break-ins, no problems. It was like their own special security. Thank you. So as I said, Sonny liked women a lot, and at one point, as an aside, this is when he was, I don't know, 101, 102, I can't remember, the videographer stepped away to get a cup of coffee, and he turns to me like that, and he goes, "Say, are you married?" I go, "Yeah, Sonny, I'm married." He goes, "Ah, too bad. I'd take you out to lunch when I get out of here." He was in a wheelchair. He had one eye, one kidney, a pacemaker, spinal stenosis. He needed help going to the bathroom, and this is now my demographic. So he had affairs with Jane Mansfield, Marilyn Monroe. This one was a hard story to get out of him because, you know why? His boyhood hero was Joe DiMaggio. That was the one time in all the interviews that he showed any kind of shame. Diane Carroll, Dionne Warwick, Dagmar, and he said to me, I couldn't help it. I had to keep him away with a bat. And I'm sitting there thinking, "Yes, Sonny, give me a break." But let's go to the next slide. So, why do we care about the mafia? And particularly through the 50s, 60s, even through the 80s, the mob, they were in everything. They were liquor distributors, nightclubs. Over on the far right, that's Marty Hodis, who was the peep show king of Times Square. A thoroughly disgusting king. I spent a lot of time on the phone with his daughter. But also paving, trucking, all sorts of, and their whole thing was to insinuate themselves into legitimate industries where they could suck out money. Michael Franzese told me a story, and I'm sure some of you know it, about when they were collecting $2 on every window that was put up in a new building in Manhattan. And they have all these scams, and by the way, we pay for that. I always just thought that we pay essentially a mob tax. We did for many years. Now it's just a corruption tax. But that's why you should care about the mafia. Next one. So, one fun thing about Sonny is he was in the music business. And he was a silent partner in Buddha Records, Kama Sutra Records. They were independent music labels. And they actually liked him because he wasn't the kind of guy who put his girlfriend on a record who couldn't sing. He really cared about music. And one day he's telling me the story. He said, "Yeah, there was a song. It was about a laundromat." And I'm thinking, this guy doesn't have dementia. Everything he's told me is checked out. What's he talking about? So here's what he was talking about. In 1964, there was a big hit, Leader of the Pack. Does anyone remember that? Right. Okay. The Roulette Records came out with a parody of Leader of the Pack called Leader of the Laundromat. It sold 900,000 copies, and Paul Vance was the main songwriter. He was the same guy who wrote Catch a Falling Star. Great, great songwriter. So anyway, Mo Levy was running Roulette Records. Violent, bad guy associated with the Genovese family. As Sonny said to me, I didn't like him, he was a thief, but I couldn't do what I wanted to him because he was a friend of ours. And so he didn't put the quote marks, but so anyway, Mo Levy decided that he took all their advance. He took the money that they made from the records. And Paul Vance wasn't gonna take it. He said, no, I want my money. And he slugged Mo Levy and knocked him down. Sonny was there, and he said, you stupid son of a bitch. And he was there with his guys. They hung Paul out the window of the 11-story grill building and said, give him the money, give him the money. He said, yeah, you got it, Sonny. And both Sonny and Paul Vance told me this story, and so did Ron Dante, who was another guy, in the Detergents. The group was called the Detergents. And after that, Paul Vance and Sonny became good friends. I interviewed Paul when he was 90. He has since died. And he was a little cranky at first, but I said, well, I understand you were a guy who stood up to Mo Levy and Sonny Franzese, and then of course he warmed up. And he tells me the story, and at the end he says, yeah, God gave me two gifts. I'm a songwriter and I'm a lover. So, next slide. So, Sonny, you can't really see this. Now, he literally became public enemy #1 in 1966. I sadly have read a lot of court records in my life, and I'm not a lawyer. I have never seen anything like this. In March, the Manhattan DA said he was the muscle behind a big bookmaking ring, which he was, although he denied it, of course. In April, the U.S. attorney charged him with conspiring to rob banks across the country. In October, the Queens DA indicted him in the murder of Ernie the Hawk Rapolo, who was a one-eyed hitman from Baldwin, and he was called the Hawk because even with no right eye, he never missed a shot. And then in December, the Nassau DA accused him of a home invasion in Oceanside in the home of the jukebox guy, El Azrati. And his guys tied up these two teenage boys in the basement of their home. They were like 18 and 16. And Lester, the younger son, while he was tied up, he said, can you turn on the TV? They said no. So, next slide. So, this is Sonny's mugshot, right? Now, I made a mistake, and I regret it to this day. This is not the original version of the mugshot. I got this mugshot from the family. You know what was around this mugshot, the original version? A frame. Who frames a mugshot? And the family framed his mugshot. So, next slide. So, this is Sonny with his lawyer, I'm blanking on his name, but he was a big lawyer who took his case up to the Supreme Court. And this is a picture in the Nassau County Courthouse, and he was being escorted from Queens to Nassau for his trial. And see the shotguns? And they had the rooftops of the courthouse lined with cops and shotguns because they thought the mob were gonna bust him out of there. That's how big a character he was. Next slide. This is Ernie the Hawk Rapolo, who, as I said, he was a hitman, very bitter. He felt like he hadn't gotten the opportunities that he should have. Sonny denied having anything to do with his murder. Next slide. So he was actually acquitted of the murder of Ernie the Hawk. And I have some great pictures in the book about the trial, because the trial was the subject of a Life magazine article. But he was convicted of bank robbery. And even though he never went along to the banks, but because he directed the robbers and took some of the proceeds, he was found guilty. So he wound up going to prison at Leavenworth. And to his final days, he said, no, I didn't do that. But he also said he didn't do a lot of other things that I think he did. Next slide. Tina tried to hold the family together. And when you have a guy like Sonny, he, for all his faults, which were numerous, he really did love his family, and he was a huge presence in that household. He would go to his kids' baseball games, and you know, as Frankie Blue Eyes said to me, you know, one thing I didn't like, he would always wear black socks with shorts. You know, you shouldn't do that. But Tina was trying desperately to hold the family together, and here's Michael, and here are the three youngest children, Christina, Gia, and John. Those are the children from the second marriage. And she had a terrible time. She spent a fortune appealing the decisions, trying very hard to get him out of prison, and really waging a publicity campaign, which was very unusual for a mob wife. Next slide. So, Sonny was sentenced to 50 years in prison for bank robbery, but in the federal system, and also the state system, you never do as they put it, the entire bid. When he was sentenced, he told Judge Mishler, just wait, I'll do the whole bid. But he kept getting released on parole, and he kept violating his parole 5 times. But he finally got out, and his favorite son, John, and this is a big part of the book, who was a serious drug addict, wore a wire on his own father and testified against him when he was 93 years old, and sent him back to prison for 8 more years. He didn't send him back to prison. Sonny's actions sent him back to prison. And this is the FBI agent, Robert Lewicki, who persuaded John to turn. And what the FBI does is they just cold call the house. They keep cold calling the house. And he must have cold called the house, I don't know how many times. And one day, John picked up and he took the call and he did it. I spent a lot of time with John. He said he wasn't doing it against his father, he was doing it against the life. But there's a lot more about that. Next slide. So this is Sonny at 102 at the nursing home. He was actually much better looking than that. That's not a flattering picture. But he hated the nursing home, but he never complained about it because he said it was so much better than prison, which I'm sure it was. And I think I have one more slide. Okay, next book is The Lansky Legacy, which is coming out in July. And so the publisher says, tell people about the next book, ask them to pre-order it, Barnes & Noble, because they're trying to counter Amazon. And I did this with Meyer Lansky II, who is his grandson. So here I am from Minnesota, suddenly writing about organized crime, something I know nothing about. So if any of you have any questions, that's just a taste of what's in the book. There's a lot more, and it's really a classic Long Island story. Has anybody got any questions?
How did he initially get involved in it?
How did he?
Yeah.
His father was, he was called the Lion. His father was a mobster in Naples, and then when he came over to the States, he just continued. He was a Don. And Sonny's first murder was when he was 14. So he was inducted into the family after that. And he was inducted by the time he was 16, but they kept it quiet because he murdered someone at the behest of Gambino, I believe it was. But he was very proud of the fact that he was inducted into the mob so young. And when you get made, they assign a family to you. So he was assigned to the then Profaci family, which became the Colombo family. Now, when Michael Franzese got into the mob, you know, there was a rule that if you wanted to be made, you had to kill someone. But then occasionally they would do what they call open the books. So if they had people they thought were good earners, because you know anyone who made money had to kick money up to the top. So they let Michael in because he was considered an earner. There was work. The two terms are worker and earner. Workers are the ones who kill, maim, and beat up people, and the earners are the ones who bring in the money.
How much total time did he do in prison?
He did about 28 years on the bank bid and another 7 on this one. So it was probably a total of 35. And he blamed prison for destroying his family because John became a drug addict, Gia became a drug addict, died of a drug overdose, little Christina died of cancer, that has nothing to do with family, and Michael wound up cooperating with the government when he got caught. And Sonny always blamed prison for doing this, and Michael says, and he says he was unfairly convicted, and Michael says, well, yeah, Dad, but it's not like you were a priest, you know, I mean, you were living the life, and, but he believed that steadfastly to the end. Anybody else?
So does the mob still operate?
Yes, it does, as evidenced by the gambling scandal that came out, the sports gambling scandal, and some of those guys live on Long Island. They've just become much quieter, more underground. Up until really the late 90s, the FBI, they did something really smart. They had a squad for each family. So it's like a beat reporting system in a newspaper where you become an expert on that particular family. And it really was effective in bringing prosecutions against these guys. The other big thing that they had was RICO. RICO was a huge change. So they were able to put more guys away. And it was very, very effective. And then in the 2000s, the whole focus shifted to terrorism. So they're not as heavily invested in fighting organized crime. But you know what happens is, and this is something that I think is sort of interesting as I've watched what's happened with organized crime over the years. We as a nation, we love outlaws because you know we're a country born out of a revolution. And so there was a time when they were really glamorous and they push it. If you give them a little rope, they'll take it. And then there's always a tipping point where law enforcement pushes back and you know has to put them in their place. And in another 20 years, they'll pop up again. You know, they don't go away. But and they are people to worry about.
So what activities are they involved with now in Long Island?
Gambling is a big one. Trafficking, sex trafficking is mostly the Bloods. It's gang related, and it's organized, but it's the Bloods. The mafia likes to say they're not involved in prostitution. They are, but not to the extent that the Bloods are on Long Island. But those are the two things. And they're also, the cop who was arrested for running the brothel. He got his start. He was a shakedown guy. He would collect loans, the usurious loans that guys gave out, and he would be the muscle who would threaten people if they didn't pay off their gambling debts. So there's a lot of extortion and stuff like that, shaking down legitimate businesses. But it's much quieter than it was.
What do you say about his son turning on him?
He said, that's a really good question. He said, was something wrong with him, maybe it was the drugs. John has HIV. He said, maybe it was the HIV. He wasn't right in the head. And John went into the witness protection program, which was created because of Sonny Franzese. Talk about the irony of that. I'm not going to tell you that whole story. You have to read the book to get that part. But John went into witness protection, and he realized a lot of guys who go into witness protection don't really like it because they miss their friends and their families, and they miss, their life. And he decided to leave the witness protection program partly because he thought he was going to sell his story and make a lot of money, and you can't really do that in the witness protection program. So he needed to go see his father at the nursing home, and he went. And he was really nervous because he's a marked man. If someone sees him in New York, he's a dead man. And I saw Michael when he came here. Michael has since become a minister, and he gives sermons at churches. And he came to talk at a Baptist church in Santa Maria. He was scared. He was so scared, constantly looking out the window. But back to John. John goes to visit his father at the nursing home. And John had lost a lot of weight because he's been sick. He used to be buffed up with steroids. And he walks in and he looks at his dad, and his father didn't recognize him because he was so, skinny. And John said, "Do you know who this is?" And Sonny looks at him, "It's coming to me, it's coming to me." And John said, "It's John." "Oh, what happened to your face? You look so old." And what did he say? "You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have talked that." But that's all he said. And he said, "But you've always been crazy, and you're my son, and I love you."
I've got a question. You talked about the glamour
Yeah.
going on, and it reminds me of a story when my oldest daughter was going to a pre-K program, Grace Day School in Massapequa. Of course, you know who the families that lived in Massapequa, the Campinos. And one day she comes home and tells me, "I was talking to so-and-so, and she has a daughter, same age as our daughter." And she started talking about her father being in the mob, and how when she came home, when she was a little girl, and the mother says, come here, your father's on TV. Doesn't he look good?" So there was a lot of glamour in that world. Yeah, so they weren't just operating. People knew who they were, to your point, but they were right up front about it. Why? Was it ego?
Well, I think think there's something in the American. I've thought about this a lot because I was initially really repelled by these guys, and I still am to a degree. But I do think there's something in the American psyche where we kind of like the rule breakers. We kind of like the guys who are the outlaws, but only to a point, And the thing about Sonny, the other thing Sonny used to say, he said, "I always knew how to dress." And he was always very well dressed, and Tina always was in designer clothes. So they were like a very, very glamorous couple. And one thing that I noticed in the 60s, there were a lot of perp walks with mobsters. And those classic perp walks where they're throwing, a newspaper over their face, something like that. Sonny never covered his face. And I asked him one day, I said, "Why didn't you ever cover your face?" He said, "I just couldn't. And he knew that he was taking a risk by being so high profile, but he said, "I couldn't back down," And I was kind of impressed by the fact that he couldn't cover his face. He wasn't ashamed of who he was, I had to do a talk in Southampton, and the moderator said, "Well, at the end of his life, he probably regretted what he did." No. Sonny did not regret a thing. He was very proud of who he was.
Is Tina still alive, or did she pass?
No, she died. She died at 77. She had a stroke and she had lung cancer. And this is classic. Sonny, he married a much younger woman. She was 17 years younger than he was. And he obviously thought she was going to take care of him. And he said, "I don't know how this happened. She went and died on me," because his expectation was that she was going to take care of him.
And he was home for that. He wasn't in prison for that. He was home.
No, he was in prison when she died.
Oh.
He was in, and it shook him. He admitted that it really set him back, when she died. And then, when he got out, no one in his family took him home. Think about that. And he was in bad shape. He required a lot of care, but he wound up in a nursing home because no one would take him in.
Did he have a lot of visitors there?
Oh my God, he had so many visitors. It was like this constant stream of people, and they were still giving him money. He had this fanny pack full of money. It was unbelievable, and they all knew who he was, and he said, "Yeah, it's too much, But he was very used to being the boss. And so I made the mistake, because he hated the food. I realize now he was kind of manipulating me. Because, it was rice or white stuff, and he hated the food. And I said, "Well, what do you want? I'll bring you food," Big mistake. Well, I said, "What do you want? What do I know about Italian food? Penne alla vodka," or, and he says, pasta fazool, his favorite dish. And of course, in Queens, you'd think there'd be a lot of Italian restaurants. No, there was one deli in all of Queens that made pasta fazool that we had to go to every time I went back to get the pasta fazool for supper.
Was it Parkside?
No, it wasn't Parkside, but yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one, but it wasn't Parkside. And
That's the mob restaurant.
yeah,
One of
sure.
them.
Did he have a relationship with religion at all?
With who?
With religion, with the
Very interesting question. He was raised Catholic, and every time he passed a church, he'd cross himself. It was almost a superstition as opposed to a faith. And he did say to me, he hated Judge Mishler, Jacob Mishler, who sentenced him to 50 years, and he said, "I'll meet him in hell." He fully expected to go to hell, and he was not afraid, which is kind of remarkable. I wouldn't be afraid.
You talked about glamorization. I remember being in a restaurant years ago, and Don Gotti, dapper Don, very well dressed, and people were coming and shaking his hand.
Really?
And I just said, he's a thug. Why would you go? And one of my guests at my table said, "Oh, I have to go shake his hand." And I'm like, why would you want to shake his hand?
Well, I agree with you. I wouldn't want to shake his hand.
No,
You know.
but so many people shaking his hand.
The other thing is, these guys are killers, and I have this in the book. He's the kind of guy. He was so friendly and so funny. He's the kind of guy you would invite to a backyard barbecue, but then you realize you don't want him close to anyone you love or anything you love, because these guys worm their way in. So Michael was telling me the story about how they would they'd befriend a banker and find out he liked prostitutes. So they'd get him involved with prostitution, and then all of a sudden he could be blackmailed, and he'd have to give them good rates on bankrolls. And so they insinuate themselves. And I think it's incredibly naive to think that you can handle a guy like that.
Yeah, now, once you're in the mob, you're always in the mob. There's no out. There's no I won't do this anymore.
No.
In all your years doing investigative reporting, did you ever feel threatened yourself?
Oh, yeah. And I was threatened over this book. A couple guys tried to shake me down. It was bad. It was very bad, which is why I don't have any acknowledgments in this book, because I didn't want to put anyone else at risk. Yes, I have been threatened multiple times. And at one point, they put a camera in front of my house to watch who was coming by, and I'm thinking, okay, here I am in my jammies going down my driveway to get my newspaper, and I'm on the Suffolk County Police camera. But yes, I have been threatened. Anybody else?
What was Michael's relationship with his biological father?
None. Zero. And according to Michael. And he has a story in his book. He wrote a couple memoirs. The second one's kind of a rewrite of the first, but he talked about he worked in an ice cream store once, and this guy came in, and it hit him. He realized that was his real father, Louis Grillo, but he didn't realize it till later. That household was a very, very difficult household, because he was always aware that he was the stepchild. And he's got this mother who really treated the first 3 kids from his first marriage terribly. I mean, they would get lesser gifts at Christmas than her children. And Tina had this terrible temper. She was always yelling. And she would go on these cleaning sweeps throughout the house and she kept the house, she was fastidious about housekeeping, but she'd go through these cleaning sweeps and she'd dump out toys and papers of her kids that she didn't think they needed. And it turned out she was looking for money, because Sonny used to give his daughter Christina money to hide, because Tina was a big spendthrift. And so he would hide it from her so that they would have it. But no, Michael really had no relationship with his biological father, and when he was 24, they opened the books, let him in the mafia, and that's when Sonny officially adopted him and changed his name to Franzese.
Were you gonna tell us the driver?
Oh, thank you. See, I knew I'd forget. So, you know, I'm calling all these people, trying to get all these details about Sonny, and you know, I call this neighbor, and no, I'm not gonna talk to you, and I knew that he was a good friend of Sonny. No, I don't want my name anywhere near this. I'm like, all right, no, I'm fine. After the book came out, he got it, and he called me. And he goes, remember me? And I said, oh, I think you're one of the people who was screaming at me on the phone. He said, no, I was the guy who drove the car, drove him from the prison when you brought the cookies. So we did get the right car. It was Sonny.
So going back to the, that period of time and all that, so you had the U.S. Attorney's Office going after them, you know, Giuliani, of course, heading up in the Southern District and others with him. But you also had a mob bar, a separate bar that just defended the mafiosi.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Were
Like
you
Bruce
able to
Cutler.
talk to any of them who were?
Well, you know, Bruce Cutler, I think has died. Jerry Schardell died of Alzheimer's. A lot of these guys, and Edelman, that's what his name was, Sonny's lawyer had died. And you know, one of the problems with writing a book about a guy who's so old is a lot of the people are dead. And you know, I can get around reporting obstacles, but death is tough. And some of these guys would say, you know, I'd call them up and they go, Sandra, you're talking to me about something 30, 40, 50 years ago. And I'm like, I just had no patience. I said, stop it. You're alive, you're lucid, this is better than the alternative. So, and this is history, so tell me what you got. And usually they came through. They understood.
What do you think, what's the definition, would you say, between the difference between a gang and mafia? What is that, how do they differentiate?
Well, I think, like, you know, the Bloods are not necessarily tied by ethnic ties, or the Crips. I assumed all the Crips were black, but they're not. They're also white. So that's more just kind of street alliances. Obviously, there are ethnic ties with the mafia. You have to have Italian blood and be born in Italy. But they work with other organized crime groups. You know, they work very closely with the Jewish mafia and with the Irish. So I would say that would be the difference. And I think the reason you worry about organized crime, most criminals are not very smart, and they're one-offs. And so, you know, they do these stupid crimes, but they tend to be self-contained. The problem with organized crime is you've got a lot of guys coming together, and they can do a lot more damage, as they did with that gambling scam, with very sophisticated technology and stealing a lot of money and bringing down the careers of some well-known athletes. Now, I was at Mass the other day, and I said, you know, I feel sorry for those athletes. And this friend of mine said, you're in church. You shouldn't feel sorry for those athletes. Yeah, they made a choice, I got it. But I know how charming and funny these mob guys are, and you think you could be part of the club, and you can't. Anybody else?
And I guess possibly related, but in the early 80s, I worked for the New York Blood Program in Millville, and they were garbage all over the Quebec Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
And they were both hit, right?
Right.
Were they related to this family?
No, it was Sal Avellino, who is still alive and lives in St. James, I believe, St. James. And he was convicted of their murder. This is, in the 80s and the 90s, garbage hauling was controlled by the mafia. And it was Jerry Kopeka and Don Barstow, who was his brother-in-law. They had an independent garbage company. And there was a belief And they did cooperate with federal investigators. There was a federal investigation into the mob in Garbage. But the real reason they were killed is Avellino wanted their route because it was a very lucrative route. And they had a fortified office in East Northport. You had to go through several locks and doors, and the killer, whose name, the shooter, now I'm blanking on the shooter, but burst in there, and there were a couple shooters, and killed them. They were young men, and they had families. And their families ultimately sued the county because they felt that they hadn't been adequately protected for their cooperation. And they hadn't been at all. I think they were killed in the 2000s.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
That sounds right, yeah.
Also, another lab I worked in, Curatola Brothers had a moving company. They were also mob related.
That's
You know that
interesting.
family?
I do not. That's interesting.
Just to let you know.
But it's receded a lot. You know, they're not, but you know, they're still around.
They were in the ice business
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
My grandfather, when he came to America, turn of the century and in the 20s and 30s, they had a route because the refrigerator wasn't invented then. So people had ice boxes, and they approached my grandfather and said, "We want your route. And if you don't do it, we'll kidnap." My father was very little, and we'll kidnap him. And so he gave up his route.
Yeah. I have a lot of stories like that, you know, because these guys just take. They don't ask. They just take. And I guess I didn't understand until I did this book just how many mobsters there were and are on Long Island. You think of Long Island as being this bucolic, beautiful place, which it is, but there's also a lot of other stuff going on beneath the surface.
There was also mobsters in the red sauce business where pizza parlors in the city had to buy their sauce from this group.
Yeah. At an inflated price.
Yes.
I had an uncle that was an Irish, I guess, hitman in the mafia, you know, worked for the mafia. And my cousin, his daughter, was married at Oheka Castle, and
Never
it
very
was
well.
it was like 10 tables of just men in black suits, no women at all. The most amazing wedding. And I was at a mafia wedding.
I'll stick with the envelopes.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for this. I appreciate it. I do have a few books. I didn't bring a lot, but if I run out of books, I would be, and you ask me for one, I'll happily send you one. So I have a few books over here, and if you have anything.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you.